Section 53 of Gray's Anatomy, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Laurie Ann Walden. Anatomy of the Human Body, Part 2, by Henry Gray. The Muscles and Fascia of the Leg, Part 2. The Deep Group. Popliteus, Flexor digitorum longus, Flexor hallucis longus, Tibialis posterior. Deep transverse fascia. The deep transverse fascia of the leg is a transversely placed intermuscular septum between the superficial and deep muscles of the back of the leg. At the sides it is connected to the margins of the tibia and fibula. Above, where it covers the popliteus, it is thick and dense, and receives an expansion from the tendon of the semimembranosus. It is thinner in the middle of the leg, but below, where it covers the tendons passing behind the malleoli, it is thickened and continuous with the laciniate ligament. The popliteus is a thin, flat, triangular muscle, which forms the lower part of the floor of the popliteal fossa. It arises by a strong tendon about 2.5 cm long, from a depression at the anterior part of the groove on the lateral condyle of the femur, and to a small extent from the oblique popliteal ligament of the knee joint, and is inserted into the medial 2/3 of the triangular surface above the popliteal line on the posterior surface of the body of the tibia, and into the tendinous expansion covering the surface of the muscle. Variations. Additional head from the sesamoid bone in the outer head of the gastrocnemius. Popliteus minor, rare. Origin from femur on the inner side of the plantaris, insertion into the posterior ligament of the knee joint. Peroneotibialis, 14%. Origin, inner side of the head of the fibula, insertion into the upper end of the oblique line of the tibia. It lies beneath the popliteus. The flexor hallucis longus is situated on the fibular side of the leg. It arises from the inferior 2/3 of the posterior surface of the body of the fibula, with the exception of 2.5 cm at its lowest part, from the lower part of the interosseous membrane, from an intermuscular septum between it and the peronei laterally, and from the fascia covering the tibialis posterior medially. The fibers pass obliquely downward and backward, and end in a tendon which occupies nearly the whole length of the posterior surface of the muscle. This tendon lies in a groove which crosses the posterior surface of the lower end of the tibia, the posterior surface of the talus, and the under surface of the sustentaculum tali of the calcaneus. In the sole of the foot it runs forward between the two heads of the flexor hallucis brevis, and is inserted into the base of the last phalanx of the great toe. The grooves on the talus and calcaneus, which contain the tendon of the muscle, are converted by tendinous fibers into distinct canals, lined by a mucous sheath. As the tendon passes forward in the sole of the foot, it is situated above, and crosses from the lateral to the medial side of the tendon of the flexor digitorum longus, to which it is connected by a fibrous slip. Variations. Usually a slip runs to the flexor digitorum, and frequently an additional slip runs from the flexor digitorum to the flexor hallucis. Peroneocalcaneus internus, rare. Origin below or outside the flexor hallucis from the back of the fibula, passes over the sustentaculum tali with the flexor hallucis, and is inserted into the calcaneum. The flexor digitorum longus is situated on the tibial side of the leg. At its origin it is thin and pointed, but it gradually increases in size as it descends. It arises from the posterior surface of the body of the tibia, from immediately below the popliteal line to within 7 or 8 cm of its lower extremity, medial to the tibial origin of the tibialis posterior. It also arises from the fascia covering the tibialis posterior. The fibers end in a tendon, which runs nearly the whole length of the posterior surface of the muscle. This tendon passes behind the medial malleolus in a groove common to it and the tibialis posterior, but separated from the latter by a fibrous septum, each tendon being contained in a special compartment lined by a separate mucous sheath. It passes obliquely forward and lateralward, superficial to the deltoid ligament of the ankle joint, into the sole of the foot, where it crosses below the tendon of the flexor hallucis longus, and receives from it a strong tendinous slip. It then expands and is joined by the quadratus plantae, and finally divides into 4 tendons which are inserted into the bases of the last phalanges of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th toes, each tendon passing through an opening in the corresponding tendon of the flexor digitorum brevis, opposite the base of the first phalanx. Variations: flexor accessorius longus digitorum, not infrequent, origin from fibula or tibia or the deep fascia, and ending in a tendon which, after passing beneath the laciniate ligament, joins the tendon of the long flexor or the quadratus plantae. The tibialis posterior, tibialis posticus, lies between the 2 preceding muscles and is the most deeply seated of the muscles on the back of the leg. It begins above by 2 pointed processes, separated by an angular interval, through which the anterior tibial vessels pass forward to the front of the leg. It arises from the whole of the posterior surface of the interosseous membrane, excepting its lowest part, from the lateral portion of the posterior surface of the body of the tibia, between the commencement of the popliteal line above and the junction of the middle and lower thirds of the body below, and from the upper 2/3 of the medial surface of the fibula. Some fibers also arise from the deep transverse fascia and from the intermuscular septa separating it from the adjacent muscles. In the lower fourth of the leg its tendon passes in front of that of the flexor digitorum longus, and lies with it in a groove behind the medial malleolus, but enclosed in a separate sheath. It next passes under the laciniate and over the deltoid ligament into the foot, and then beneath the plantar calcaneo-navicular ligament. The tendon contains a sesamoid fibrocartilage, as it runs under the plantar calcaneo-navicular ligament. It is inserted into the tuberosity of the navicular bone, and gives off fibrous expansions, one of which passes backward to the sustentaculum tali of the calcaneus, others forward and lateralward to the 3 cuneiforms, the cuboid, and the bases of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th metatarsal bones. Nerves. The popliteus is supplied by the 4th and 5th lumbar and 1st sacral nerves, the flexor digitorum longus and tibialis posterior by the 5th lumbar and 1st sacral, and the flexor hallucis longus by the 5th lumbar and the 1st and 2nd sacral nerves through the tibial nerve. Actions. The popliteus assists in flexing the leg upon the thigh. When the leg is flexed, it will rotate the tibia inward. It is especially called into action at the beginning of the act of bending the knee, inasmuch as it produces the slight inward rotation of the tibia, which is essential in the early stage of this movement. The tibialis posterior is a direct extensor of the foot at the ankle joint. Acting in conjunction with the tibialis anterior, it turns the sole of the foot upward and medialward, i.e., inverts the foot, antagonizing the peronei, which turn it upward and lateralward, or evert it. In the sole of the foot, the tendon of the tibialis posterior lies directly below the plantar calcaneo-navicular ligament, and is therefore an important factor in maintaining the arch of the foot. The flexor digitorum longus and flexor hallucis longus are the direct flexors of the phalanges, and, continuing their action, extend the foot upon the leg. They assist the gastrocnemius and soleus in extending the foot, as in the act of walking, or in standing on tiptoe. In consequence of the oblique direction of its tendons, the flexor digitorum longus would draw the toes medialward, were it not for the quadratus plantae, which is inserted into the lateral side of the tendon, and draws it to the middle line of the foot. Taking their fixed point from the foot, these muscles serve to maintain the upright posture by steadying the tibia and fibula perpendicularly upon the talus. 3. The lateral crural muscles, peroneus longus, peroneus brevis. The peroneus longus is situated at the upper part of